Hi everyone, happy Saturday afternoon. I'm coming live from my car. I just have a few minutes, so I wanted to do today's video. So today is today is day 23 of the video challenge. And when I reached out to see what people wanted me to talk about, a good friend of mine, an old acquaintance from nurse practitioner school and my master's, asked me how I deal with criticism and judgment. And I think that's a really good topic. And I actually have a lot to say on that. And I'm sure you guys aren't surprised because I always have a lot to say about a lot of things. So, criticism and judgment. And so first I kind of just want to talk about why our brain really gets frazzled when we have that type of feedback. And, really practical steps to help us not be so reactionary to those things. So, first of all, I think that when we are, when our mindset isn't right, and you've heard me talk about mindset in a lot of my other videos, when our mindset isn't right, when we lack self-worth, when we're not strong in what our true values and beliefs are, when we have, low self-esteem, self-love and compassion, we're very, very vulnerable. And we spend much of our time looking to the outside world to validate us. And we're really shy and timid and we don't have a voice. And I, I struggle with this every day. I'm much, much better. But this has been a really big core wound for me and something that I've really had to work at because I really looked out into the world for validation. And, the reality is that validation has to come from within. That trust of ourselves have to come from within. And the world is a really big, harsh place. And unfortunately, that the world, is feeding this idea of perfectionism and, falsehoods. When we look at social media, when we look at, television, magazines, print, whatever it is, it's pumping this image of perfection, right? That we've got it all together. We look amazing. We have awesome bodies. We have our shit together. And the reality is most of us are just trying to survive day to day. None of us have perfect lives. And if anyone tells you they do, a big alarm bell should go off, because they don't. And so that really perpetuates, our insecurities. The other thing is biologically in our brain, we have a negative bias. And so that was very purposeful when we were cavemen and when we were in a very survival type of way of life. It was very much about fight or flight. And so that negative bias in our brain, when we have any type of threat, and criticism and judgment is a type of threat, our body goes into a fight or flight mode. And all we can hear in that conversation is the negative. We can't actually hear the positive. And so, over many, many years, my friends and my family would say to me, I wish you saw yourself the way I saw you, right? And our loved ones give us positive feedback on a daily basis, but we never acknowledge it. We never take it in. We never hear it. And it's so detrimental. So I think when we're experiencing, judgment and criticism, the first is we have to have a decent mindset to be able to deal with it. At least know our weaknesses in our mindset, right? So know, are you a perfectionist? I have to say I'm addicted to perfectionism and I'm really working hard to break down those barriers, and I have to do that on a daily basis. I know that I'm a people pleaser. I know that I look for external validation. And so then I'm much more aware of what the motives of my behavior are, or what the motives are of my reaction. I think that's really important. The first thing I think when we're getting negative criticism or judgment, if it's in a workplace setting or a professional setting versus whether it's personal. So somebody criticizing your parenting, somebody criticizing you as a partner or as a friend. It's always looking at what the purpose of that is. So is it, a professional evaluation? Is it, a friend just giving you advice because they're upset with you? What is the motive? So is it coming from a good place, a place of love, or is it coming from a place of fear? Unfortunately, the majority of our world and the majority of people are coming from a place of fear and insecurity. And so their delivery of those messages can be very harsh, and they hurt. And so I think that the biggest myth that we have to get over is that we're the only ones that hurt when we get this feedback, when we get criticized and judged. Everybody hurts. And that was a big realization for me, is that everybody hurts. It stings like a mofo, like it hurts. But then we choose to perpetuate that suffering. And that's really important, right? We have power. We can't give that power away. And so, certainly that stings, but the perpetuation of that stinging and that pain and that undue suffering is our choice. And so I think that that's important to validate, is that it all hurts regardless of where we are. The other thing to validate is that we are all imperfect beings. We're perfectly imperfect. And so we're never gonna get 100% or an A+, and I learned that the hard way in university, right? Trying to really push to get those perfect grades. And the reality is, yes, science is 100%, but we're not perfect. And even in my professional reviews, my yearly reviews at work, we're not perfect. We're not going to get perfect scores. But we hold ourselves accountable to this level of perfection that is unattainable. And then we beat ourselves up. So I think validating those things are really important. The next is, despite the delivery of the criticism or the judgment, looking to find truth within it, is important. And choosing what you're going to do with it. Sometimes, there's nothing. It's just somebody being rude and coming from a place of fear, and their reaction towards you is more of a reflection of them versus a reflection of you. But even in that situation, it's really important to be able to dig deep and look and see if there's any truth to what they're saying. Was there a situation where we didn't come from a kind and compassionate view? Did we make a mistake? And own it, right? There's a lot of freedom in owning it versus trying to live in fear and hide it, because the reality is we're human. We make mistakes. So when somebody is giving us some criticism, really start, and if they're coming from an aggressive tone, it's really important that we start to take some deep breaths. It's amazing if you slow down your breathing and you start taking deep breaths, how that changes the interaction with the person that you're dealing with. It helps to de-escalate them, but it also helps to keep you grounded, because what we end up doing is the first negative comment that we hear, we hold on to that and we immediately go into our brain, we shut out, our ears close off, we don't hear the rest of the conversation, and we mull over and overanalyze that particular detail. And that may not have been the gist of the conversation. Somebody who is very professional will do the sandwich method when they're giving constructive feedback to somebody. They will always start out giving some positive feedback. They will layer it with some negative feedback, or some constructive criticism. They will maybe give you suggestions of how to help you, or resources on how to help you, whether that's courses or whatever. And then they'll end it with some positive feedback. And like I said, that negativity bias, sometimes all we hear is that little piece of constructive criticism. We don't hear about all the good. So a really good practice, no matter in what type of conversation you're in, is to report back what they've said to you. Because what that does is it takes it out of our brain. So it gets rid of the power of it, right? And puts it out. It's like journaling something. So I think in one of my other videos, I said that when we leave it in our head is a small place. So that problem or that negative detail or that criticism seems very big. And it's like a steamroller. We give it power. And so by verbalizing that out loud, allows us actually to register the positivity that has been said, and allows us to be able to de-escalate that negative comment. So saying something to your boss that, okay, so what I understand from this evaluation is that what I'm good at is X, Y, and Z. What I need work on is this. And I do want to improve. And I see what you're saying there, and I do see that. And I've been thinking about that, and this is what I'm thinking I need help with. So whether you need a course or some extra support, or if it's, I've never thought about that, and I think I need to think about it, and I will come back to you on how I need assistance with that. And that de-escalates it right away. But it also puts you to feel like you're in a power position, right? You're in control, and you're not going to go and break down. Because the worst thing we can do is let those thoughts get caught up by ego. And ego I call chastity in my mind. She's an evil fucking bitch. And she comes from a place of fear, and she just wants to make my life miserable. And she will take that negative thought, whether it was like, oh, you need to be a little bit more assertive in your workplace, to me jumping with that, and I end up throwing myself in the future, and that being said that I never speak up, that I'm a meek person, I'm not a valuable employee, I'm not right? And we roll with that, and all of that is fictitious, right? All of that is fictitious. That's that undue suffering that we put on ourselves. The other thing that I find really helpful in relationships, right? Because the reality is we're imperfect, right? We try to be the best partners that we can. And the reality is our partners sometimes need to give us feedback. And, like I said, that feedback is uncomfortable. We never want to see that we're at fault. But the reality is we are human. And so, for example, I've been using this little, this way of communicating with my husband, because what it does is it allows us to, so for example, say if I ask my husband to go take out the garbage, and this is probably something that's familiar, or whatever that is. I'm asking for my husband to do something, and I think a lot of people can relate to this. And they say later, they do it later, and it never gets done, and we have to kind of, ask again or whatever. What I started saying to my husband was, when you don't do what I'm asking you in a timely fashion, that makes me feel, or the story that I bring up in my mind. So I like, instead of it makes me feel, can kind of become, make your partner kind of put their back up on edge. But what I've started to say is, the story in my head that I'm telling myself is that when you don't do those things, it's that you don't love me and you don't respect me. And you don't acknowledge that that's bothering me. So for me, I've told my husband many of times that if I'm asking for help, it's really bothering me in this moment, because I'm really anxious because of my to-do list. And so I feel, rejected in that moment. And that can be really eye-opening for your partner, of what that dialogue is in your head. Because we don't necessarily show anybody that dark place, that negative advertising that shows up in our head. And when our partners realize how dark that gets, because they're just thinking it's just about the effing garbage, Shasta. Well, no, it's not about the garbage. There's, as women, it's deep, right? There's some deepness to that. They realize how that makes us feel. And then, they can say, well, no, that wasn't. And it really de-escalates a situation versus, asking them to do it again, really getting passive aggressive, doing it for yourself, and then, making each other's lives like hell. Because if we stay in our head, we just, we just create this negativity and this stuff that just is not good. It's not good for us. It's not good for our relationships. So, in our relationships, I think, regardless, even if you got some really heavy negative feedback from a coworker, you can say, I hear what you're saying. And, the story I'm telling myself in my head is this. And so it allows that person to reflect on how they've delivered that message, but also see how hurtful that message can be to you. And so I really think that we need to be a little bit more honest and open with our feelings to people, because the reality is we're living in a world where people are not seeing the consequences of how they're treating others because they're doing it through text, they're doing it through social media. And it's so incredibly toxic, because with communication, we're not necessarily just listening to. Communication requires, looking at somebody and seeing what their body, body, you guys know what I'm talking about. Their body languages, as well as, what they're saying. We need all of that in order to be able to interpret language. And when you text something or you post something on social media, there's a lot of connotation to that isn't displayed, and it can be taken really cruelly. So, try to avoid communicating in heightened situations, in situations that matter, in situations where there's emotion involved. Try to avoid doing that through social media, through text, through email. It's uncomfortable having to have those conversations verbally, but it holds you accountable for not saying something that you're going to regret, but it also allows you to be honest. And so it's really important, like I said, to breathe, stay centered, try not to react, try to hear the truth in that situation. And really, lastly, the person that reacts the most loses. And so we have to remember that sometimes the conversations are really not about us, and it's more of a reflection of that other person. We sometimes can be a mirror for people, and their reactions to us really is an example of something that they need to heal within ourselves. And so, if we can't find truth within the message, then we really need to be kind of stepping back and sending that person love and support, right? It also helps to say, thank you for giving me that feedback. I'll really consider that, whether you do that or not. But it's a really good way to de-escalate. So I hope that was helpful. A little bit of tips and tricks. Anyways, I'm going to take Sunday off. So I will see you on Monday for day 24. Have a great weekend, everybody. Take care.